In this video, we're going to define the meaning of price elasticity of supply. We're going to go through a worked example, so I'm going to show you exactly how it's calculated. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the different types of price elasticity of supply, what the relative percentage changes mean, as well as finally, I want to give you some examples of different goods and services under each type of price elasticity of supply. So let's get started. The definition of price elasticity of supply is that it's a numerical measure of the responsiveness of the quantity supplied to a change in the price of the product. The question we are asking is, for a given change in price, can a supplier provide more goods or services to the market? If the answer is yes, we say the good has a price elastic supply, meaning the quantity supplied responds more than proportionately to a change in its price. So what we're saying is the percentage change in quantity supplied is higher than any given percentage change in price. The result is that the PES is a number bigger than 1. And the larger the number, the more price elastic the supply is. If that's not the case, then the opposite is true. We say the good has a price inelastic supply. Now, if the good has a price inelastic supply, then the percentage change in quantity supplied is smaller than any given percentage change in price. In other words, suppliers are not really able to respond to changes in price. And so that results in a price elasticity supply number that is in between 0 and 1. And just like price elasticity of demand, there are no units for price elasticity of supply. And so an example, it would look something like this, right? So if the price increased from $5 to $10 for, let's say, demand increase, that's the reason. And then let's say quantity supplied follows, right? Because if the price is higher, then as a seller, I want to sell more goods and services and make more money. And in our situation, the quantity supplied increases from 20 to 30. So we want to find the percentage change in quantity supplied first. So we know what that is, right? So that is going to be Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q1. And so in this situation, it's going to be 30 minus 20 divided by 20. So this is going to be 10 divided by 20. This is going to be 0.5. So our percentage change in quantity is 50%. What about our percentage change in price? Well, it's going to be P2 minus P1 divided by P1. It's going to be equal to 10 minus 5 divided by 5. So in this situation, it's going to be 1. Now, in order to find PES, all I have to do is divide 0.5 into 1, and that actually gives me a PES of 0.5. So in this situation, the good is price inelastic. Now, if you remember learning price elasticity of demand, you might have learned something called the midpoint formula. You can also apply the midpoint formula to price elasticity of supply if you want to, but in most multiple choice questions, you don't have to. So what does that look like graphically? Well, if we're looking at a price inelastic curve, it's a little bit steeper, right? And that makes sense because we're saying that for any given change in price, there should be a smaller change in quantity, right? Because the percentage change in quantity is smaller than the percentage change in price. And so any price inelastic curve will intersect the x-axis, okay? If you see the curve intersect the x-axis, it's going to be inelastic. Now, the interesting thing is that the PES in an inelastic curve, assuming it's linear, like it's drawn here, approaches 1 as Q and P approach infinity. And this is just mathematically correct, right? Now, in reality, obviously, we have supply curves that aren't linear, right? But if the supply curve is linear, then the PS approaches 1 as Q and P approach infinity. Now, you can work out the math behind that if you want, but I'm not going to do that in this video. we're dealing with a price elastic curve, then it intersects the y-axis. And the price elasticity of supply decreases towards 1, but never reaches it, as Q and P approach infinity. Now, you can also do the math for this, but I'm not going to do this in this video. Now, you'll notice something very, very interesting is the idea that the PES is equal to 0 on an inelastic curve, okay? When we're intersecting the x-axis, and the PES is equal to infinity when we're intersecting the y-axis on a price elastic curve. Now, I'll show you the math behind this, but you don't have to know this for the exam or for anything. It's just for your pleasure that we're gonna learn this. So same equation, right? Percentage change in quantity supply, okay, in our situation is gonna be Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q1. Now, what do we know about A? Well, we know that Q2 is a number, right? We know that Q1 is also a number. And we know that when we divide everything, we'll get a number, okay? Let's call it X, okay? It's gonna be a number. It doesn't matter what the number is. Bear with me here. But what about price? What about price? Well, P2 minus P1 in this situation, P1 is 0, right? Divided by 0, okay? So you see this? Because we're intersecting the x-axis, our price starts at 0, but our quantity starts at a number. Now, obviously, we can't divide by 0, right? We cannot divide by 0. And so we're in a situation where P2, which is any number, minus 0, it's still P2. Well, we can't divide by 0, but what we can do is replace it with a number that is getting closer and closer to 0. So this is a decreasing number. It's just getting smaller, right? And so any number divided by a number that is infinitely getting smaller is going to be infinity, right? Because the number is infinitely getting smaller, right? And so any number divided by a number that's infinitely getting smaller is going to be infinity. And so any number, remember, x is also a number, any number divided by infinity is going to be approximately 0. Okay, so that's how the math works and why PES is 0. Now, why is PES infinity here? Well, the same thing, but backwards, right? So in this situation, Q1 is equal to 0. And so in this situation, the infinity is going to be divided by a certain y, right? And so PES is going to be infinity. If you work the math out, that's kind of how it works, right? I won't go too much into detail because it's way beyond the scope of what you're learning today. Okay. Conceptually, that's how it works. Now, there are two other situations that we want to be aware of. Actually, 3. And the first being the unit elastic supply. And so any supply curve intersecting the origin, no matter what its slope is, okay, has a PES of equal to 1 and is unit elastic. So it doesn't matter what the curve looks like. As long as it intersects the origin and it is a line, like it is a linear line, it's gonna be unit elastic. And the reason is because on any 2 points on the line, the percentage change in quantity supply is going to be equal to the percentage change in price. And so here we have the 0.12, right? And here we have the 0.24, okay? And so we know that from 1 to 2 is a 100% change. And also from 2 to 4 is a 100% change, okay? And so PS is equal to 1. And that is true along the whole line, okay? Unit elastic supply. There are also 2 more extreme situations, and that is perfectly price inelastic. Now, just like a perfectly inelastic demand curve, the perfectly inelastic supply curve is vertical. and our PES is equal to 0, right? That makes sense because there's no change in quantity for any change in price, okay? So it's 0. In other words, the quantity cannot be increased. And so conceptually, if you're thinking about goods for which the quantity cannot increase or decrease, for that matter, then theoretically, you have a perfectly inelastic supply curve. Another understanding that you could use to interpret this is that the supplier is willing to sell the good at any price, right? And so let's pretend I have fish in a very short time horizon, and it's 6 p.m. I want to go home for dinner, and I've got fresh fish I need to sell. I'd be willing to sell that fish at any price because I'm throwing them in the garbage at the end of the day. Now, we know fish lasts more than one day, but that's just an extreme example, okay? The other situation is perfectly price elastic, right? So it's just like perfectly price elastic demand, the curve is horizontal, and in this situation, the PES is infinity, okay? In other words, at the given price, the seller is willing to supply any quantity, as much as possible, right? I'll sell as much as possible, okay? Now, you need to know what the graphs look like, right? And so you need to know, for example, if I give you a price inelastic curve, you need to be able to draw the curve and identify for me that, okay, the PES is in between 0 and 1, as well as provide examples of goods and services within each category of the supply curve. And so, well, let me give you some intuitive understandings of PES. Price elastic goods are easy, right, to increase production. So we're thinking about like nails and screws. Something relatively straightforward to make would be good examples. Price inelastic goods are hard to increase production. Okay? They're hard to make more of, right? So for example, airplanes, right? Boats, missiles, right? Fighter jets, skyscrapers, all those things, it's difficult to make more of. Like if I snap my fingers, I can't just build another skyscraper, right? Whereas if I snap my fingers, that's kind of the amount of time it takes to make what, an extra 50 nails and screws? Perfectly priced inelastic goods have a fixed quantity. Quantity does not change. So all this depends on your time horizon, right? So Picasso paintings on an infinite time horizon will always have a fixed quantity. Why? Because Picasso's dead, okay? Concert tickets, right? Like if you're going to see a BTS concert or a Blackpink concert, right? The stadium has a fixed number of seats. And so that's an example of perfectly inelastic supply. Now, given a long enough time horizon, if there is demand for seats in that particular stadium or concert hall, technically we can add more seats to it, but we're not concerned with that right now, right? We're concerned with, in general, the short run. Now, the other example is fresh fish at the end of the day. I have to sell it or it's going bad. What about perfectly priced elastic goods? Well, perfectly priced elastic goods technically can be sold infinitely at the price. And really the only kind of good that can be sold infinitely are goods with a zero marginal costs of production. Now, those technically don't exist, but there's a category of goods that come close. And so these are digital goods like ebooks, like if you buy an ebook from Amazon or if you buy an online course, the marginal cost of providing another unit of that good to another person is very low, very close to zero. And so those are very price elastic goods. So think about something like Netflix, right? It's very easy for Netflix to take on another customer, okay? The cost of doing so is practically zero. So one thing worthy of note is that producers of the same goods can have different price elasticities of supply, right? So we can have price elasticity supply for a whole market, or we can have the price elasticity of supply for an individual producer, like how easy it is for an individual producer to increase the quantity supplied of their good or service. And different producers are different, right? So one producer might have access to better technology, one producer might not. And so in those situations, producers of the same good can have different PES. Another note is that goods with an inelastic supply are more prone to price fluctuations. So we're thinking about agricultural goods that are hard to produce because plants in corn and rice take a long time to grow, right? And so their supply is relatively inelastic, so they're very prone to price fluctuations in the market. With that in mind, the next video we're going to go over the determinants of price elasticity of supply, as well as understand how PES can be used by businesses to make decisions.